Hello, everybody. As Carol said, my name is Andrea Taylor. I am newly elected Vice President and also a Wildflower Show Planning Committee member. When the Wildflower Show Planning Committee was brainstorming speakers for the to address our theme of pollination and pollinators, Bill Rodstrom's name came up. Bill is a former Park Service naturalist and a Fish and Wildlife Service biologist with a long-term interest in growing native plants. Tonight, Bill will talk about how to convert biologically barren landscapes into healthy habitats for local pollinators and like bees and butterflies. By planting native host and nectar plants, we can all do something to reverse the rapid decline of insects and birds. Recently, Bill installed bee-friendly and butterfly-friendly gardens at the Jefferson Community Center. And he'll show some examples of those gardens tonight. And there will be time at the end of the presentation to answer some questions. And without further ado, here's Bill.
Hello. I'm going to go ahead and get my program up and starting anyway. I'm kind of new at Zoom, so bear with me here while we go to presenter mode. Anyway, I'll be talking about what Andrea said about building habitat for butterflies and for bees and other pollinators. So to start off with, I'll be applying Douglas Tallamy research and data on why native plants are important. I'll talk about the favorites for local butterflies and bees, and about how to use Cowscape for picking which host plants are good for butterflies and moths. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the gardens that I put in at the Jefferson Community Center. I want to start off with a couple really good books from Douglas Tallamy, Bringing Nature Home. If you didn't see that video earlier last fall or so, maybe it's been a year now since that was listed. It's really good about why local insects can't eat introduced plants, for instance. And Nature's Best Hope just came out in February. It's really good too. Here are some of the guiding principles for Douglas Tallamy's research. That insects are declining rapidly around the world. Some have called it a virtual insect apocalypse, but it's really shocking. Those people who've done long-term studies are finding recently, and it's mainly due to the conversion of native plant habitat into human uses, and also the use of really much stronger pesticides like neonicotinoids and invasive species, and the climate crisis have all contributed also. But the main issue is that local insects cannot eat the non-natives that we plant, so they die out, and they don't eat those things. Now, I remember I was lucky as a young boy in the 1950s to be able to explore the butterflies and bees in the scrub of East San Diego, and I could go and come back in smelling like sage and chamise, and anyway, it was. And I remember how buggy it was in those days too, because I remember driving home in the summers from Humboldt State College in the early 70s in my '66 camper van, and the windshield would be splattered with bugs. And I had to fill up pretty often in that thing, and I was constantly having to clean the windshield. And now I can drive 12 hours straight through, middle of summer, day or night, and there's hardly any bugs on the windshield. So there has been a drop in insects. And you might want to read Remembering Moth Snowstorms by Michael McCarthy. He writes about that same phenomenon in Great Britain. And I'm also, we're stuck at home with the stay-at-home orders, and there's this little background of having the coronavirus threat that could happen to anybody and any of us. And I was wondering about how people like Henry David Thoreau's life was affected by a pandemic like this, when 1 out of 3 people in Boston had tuberculosis, and it was kind of a death sentence. And his father and his grandfather died of tuberculosis. His sister Helen did, and he died of tuberculosis too. And in John Muir's time, tuberculosis was still the #1 leading cause of death in the U.S. And his daughter Helen had it, and so I just kind of wonder how that affects what do you do in your life, if things are this short anyway? And I keep thinking about what can we do. And I'm going to go into a few more Doug Tallamy guiding principles. And that's the second really important thing that he wrote about, is that about 90% of birds feed their young high-fat, high-keratin, mainly Lepidoptera caterpillars. And this is even the seed eaters like the finches and sparrows and stuff like that. But there's been a huge decline in bird numbers since the 1970s. And another important research finding was that trees and shrubs support the most native Lepidoptera by far. And they're mostly moths, probably 10 to 1 over butterfly larvae. But we can also stop using pesticides, herbicides, buying non-native invasive plants, and also not leaving outdoor lights on all night. We can help restore the earth by converting the altered landscapes back to native insect-friendly habitats, one garden at a time. And here's an example at the Jefferson Community Center. This was an asphalt playground. And after we had a choice, we could have made this lawn into something that is has lots of weed and seed and weed and feed and all kinds of chemicals and fungicides and anyway. So, but this is what an organic lawn looks like, and it's really, even though it's full of weeds like this bird's foot trefoil and white clover, they end up being good habitat for pollinators. So, that not all weeds are bad. Basically, like this leafcutter bee is a beautiful bee, Megachile periherta, and it was just climbing around in some of this white clover. Anyway, so I would just say things in nature are not so neat, and that neatness is not necessarily good for nature. Now, when planting for Lepidoptera and native bees, it'll help increase the biodiversity and cross-pollination. And if you plant plants that bloom in the spring, you'll help the spring bees. You'll help the early flight butterflies like azures, the spring azure, and migrating butterflies as well. And then having plenty of plants blooming in the summer provides nectar for butterflies and for bees, and pollen for bees to bring down to their nests. If plants are native host plants for Lepidoptera, then their caterpillars will be able to thrive into adults. So it's good to have something blooming in the fall as well, so that migrating butterflies and late season bees have something too. 87% of the plants in the world need pollinators, and a lot of this is done by native bees, along with moths and bats and birds, and the rest, pretty much about 13%, are wind pollinated. And people think of butterflies as pollinators, and they're pretty, but native bees are way better at pollination because their tongues are better adapted to carrying pollen. Their legs are too. They bring pollen back to the net, back to make pollen loaves for their youngsters. And 1/3 of the food that we eat is pollinated by a bee, mostly by non-native honeybees. But more and more farms are starting to use native bees also, since they are more efficient than honeybees at pollination. Most native bees are solitary. They dig tunnels and chambers for their offspring, either underground or in wood. And they spend much of their lives underground, waiting for the spring, waiting for the summer, whenever they emerge. And there's about 1,600 species of native bees in California. And many are tiny, like 2 millimeters across. And some are big, like carpenter bees or bumblebees, maybe an inch across. Now, as far as which trees are good for Lepidoptera, you can't go wrong with an oak. And in our area, the closest oak we have to the coast here is Oregon white oak. It's not a very big oak. It grows in the Neeland area, just overlooking Eureka, and it's host to 176 likely Lepidoptera, mostly moths and butterflies. And here's a lichen camouflage moth that likes oaks. Also, you may not think of red alders as a good one to put in your yard. They don't grow as tall if they're open grown. They get nicely shaped and not so tall and skinny as you might see in a forest where they've been getting covered over with conifers. Other good small trees are willows like Pacific willow. It's host to tiger swallowtails and bees like it in the spring. You might find silver bees on the dunes using willows, and bumblebees like willows too. And you might plant a short pine. You see that in the dunes, not a very tall pine, host to the western pine elfin and the pine white and about 50 other Lepidoptera species. One thing I want to say before getting out of the trees area is that when you bring in nursery stock from other countries, you can bring in blights like the chestnut blight, which took out all of the American chestnuts in the United States, a huge loss to the country. The white pine blister rust was imported from Asia from European nurseries. The Dutch elm disease has now killed about 40 million American elms. And even something that's affecting us locally here, the sudden oak death fungus, was first described on ornamental rhododendrons in Germany. And then it came to the US with nursery stock, and now it's spreading all over the West. And so think about when you get nursery stock, maybe try to get more native and more local sources. I want to get into shrubs now. Hairy manzanita is one of the best. It grows here in the coastal areas and on the dunes. There's a lot of varieties and subspecies and hybrids you can get also. If you don't have room for one of those, you might get a hybrid size. But if you can, try to get the species. The same is true for blue blossom. It's a very popular spring shrub for both bees and for butterflies. So I'd recommend those two for shrubs. And the little smaller shrubs would be like the evergreen huckleberry. And it's very popular in the spring with mining bees. And trailing blackberry is great. It's not a very tall shrub, but it will mound up about 3 or 4 feet if you let it grow into a blackberry patch like I have. And then it's really a good source for the spring longhorn bees in the Eucera genus. And they're cuckoo bees. I mean, it's unfortunate that many native bees have cuckoo bees who are kleptoparasites on them. And they will sneak into their tunnel after the mother bee leaves. They'll go sneak in there and lay an egg in the chamber where their offspring will kill the native bees. Well, they're native too, but they're just not the non-cuckoo bee youngster will get killed, and then they'll eat the pollen loaf there. So it's kind of creepy what cuckoo bees do, but it's just part of the world we live in. Other perennial plants for spring bees would be things like Bollander's Phacelia and Phacelia californica, both popular with spring bees like mining bees and bumblebees. California poppy is one of the best you could use for bringing a wide variety of bees into your property. Like bumblebees, there's a yellow-faced type bumblebee down in the corner. And I say type because there's something called Bombus caliginosus, which looks just like it in the photograph, and you need it. So you can't tell them apart really by photo. Strawberries and Phacelias, annual Phacelias are also really good. Beach strawberry is good for mining bees who come out early in the spring in March and April. And this picture was taken at the dunes anyway in the spring. This Phacelia, this came from a seed packet anyway, but it's got a digger bee on it too. It has blue pollen, which makes for interesting looking bees. You get a picture of the pollen sacs on their side. They're quite blue, like this honeybee here that's got blue pollen on its orbicula. Anyway, and it's on Gilia capitata. You can get 6 packs of those from CNPS. Some other nurseries have them too. Common meadow foam is also a good one you can get in 6 packs or seed packets, and provides a good spot for nectar and pollen for bees like the mason bees. And this is from both of these are from Jefferson Community Center. I'll do a quick differences between bees, wasps, and flies. Flies basically have really short antennae, and their wings go past the body. They don't have much of a waist. Wasps have really skinny waists. And they're kind of shinier. They have 4 wings, but it's kind of hard to tell how many wings. And their eyes are narrow wings. So bees' eyes are large, round, they go almost to the top of the head. Bees, on the other hand, have kind of more furry bodies. They have longer antennae, like wasps can have longer antennae, but they have very furry legs where they catch them and hold the pollen that they bring back. At least the females do. So that's just a quick difference between the two. Here's some field guides for bees. I started off with Common Bees of California. Bees and Blooms has a really good section on what to plant for bees. And Bees in Your Backyard is also more serious if you want to learn more of the genera of the country, really. That's a good one. So then I'll go into a little bit more about butterflies too. I started pretty young. I was about 9 or 10 when my mom made me a butterfly net out of a badminton racket and some cheesecloth. And they got me a copy of the butterfly book, and that was really nice of them to support my habit at that time. Anyway, and I still have a couple cigar boxes with some butterflies that I collected around that time. This was my first butterfly presentation about 50 years ago. And I want to thank my parents for supporting those early days. But I've had some mentors here locally like Scott North and Pete Haggard and Michael Mesler. They've helped a lot. And also I use iNaturalist to learn about different bees and other critters. And John Asher has been indispensable there for helping to ID bees that I post there. I want to thank Gary Phelps and Lori Lawrence for teaming up to make that butterfly favorites plant list that I'll go into here shortly on about, and that's for our chapter. And lastly, I want to thank the people at the Jefferson Community Center for all the financial and physical help, and that's mainly Heidi Benzanelli and Mark Weller. Steve Conlon did a lot of the building work, and Rian Lopez and Lauren Sanchez helped get it started. This plant list you can find on the website, and I'll give you the link here in the next slide, but it's basically butterflies that occur in the area west of Lord Ellis Summit, so the coastal area mostly. They're the most commonly ones you might see, and the first page has mostly host plants, the second page is mostly nectar plants. So you'll need both though. You can't just put a bunch of host plants in that only bloom for a month and then expect you're going to have all the butterflies you want. So here's the website, and you can go, this is going to be posted to YouTube in a day or so, and you'll be able to go and check out more of these links and stuff on your leisure. And there, while you're there at that website for the North Coast CNPS, and go to the gardening tab, and you can also see Peter Haggard's excellent list of recommended plants for the North Coast here. And here's just a blow up of the spreadsheet that we put together with a little bit about larval food plants. And I wanted to mention some field guides to butterflies. Pete and Judy Haggard's Insects of the Pacific Northwest works really well around here. Butterflies of the Pacific Northwest is very thorough, fairly recent field guide. One I used for many years is the Audubon's field guide to North American butterflies. Ceanothus, I talked about it earlier, is also really good for butterflies. The Echo Azure is one of the first ones to come out around our area here, and it's popular with bees. You can't go wrong with one of the Ceanothus shrubs, and there's plenty of hybrids and smaller sizes too. You can't get the species. If you want to get Anna's swallowtail, it's good to put plant something, a host plant that's in the umbel family, like Coast Angelica, cow parsnip, lomatium. There's a few to choose from there. Yampa is a new one that we have now at the plant sale. But don't plant fennel. It's invasive, and it encourages East European paper wasps too. Something you might not have tried is a native thistle or stinging nettle. I mean, you may think, well, that's crazy to put that in your yard, but you can tuck it into a corner somewhere and where you're not going to brush by it and get whacked by a thistle. But it's a good host plant for painted lady and crescents, and stinging nettle is good for red admirals, a beautiful butterfly. And if you get too much stinging nettle, make a soup out of it. Anyway, you can just wear gloves. For Painted Lady Hosts, you can go also to Checker Bloom. It's a beautiful nectar plant as well, Sedalia malviflora. Anyway, and it's a host plant for West Coast Lady. And this one on the right, it was on a Sedalia at the Lost Foods native plant nursery at Redwood Acres. Acmon blue, you can see at the dunes almost any month of the year. It likes buckwheats for host plants, but in this one picture on the left, it's on a western wildflower for nectar plant. Checker bloom is popular with bees like the Bombus mixtus and also orange sulfur. It's a beautiful one. I'll plant more of that, I think, in my place. I did plant a few non-natives at the Jefferson Pollinator Garden. I put in some Cosmos, and Sensation was the variety. I think it was a little better than Sonata and some of the other varieties that are around. I got this at Pearson's Building Center's nursery anyway. But it turned out to be very popular with many kinds of bees and butterflies both. I think Pearly Everlasting and Sneezeweed are both very good plants for this summertime. And in the summer is when a lot of the Asteraceae sort of plants are out, and it's makes for a very colorful show. Like common yarrow and seaside daisy are excellent for bees and for butterflies both. Here's a fiery skipper on a seaside daisy, kind of close up. One of my favorite for summer plants is coastal Gumweed-Grindelia stricta. It's had quite a few different kinds of bees and some butterflies, but mainly I've seen a lot of bees on it. And Lemon Queen sunflowers. Lemon Queen is just like a $2 packet of seeds. It's not very expensive, and you can get some beautiful plants out of it. Sunflower is native to Central California, but not native to here so much. But I would put it in just for the not only the flowers, but for the seeds too. I would suggest for fall plants that to put in West Coast goldenrod or another goldenrod species. Maybe you have a couple species going, so they don't bloom exactly at the same time. And also Henderson's aster. There's another Pacific aster or California aster. I forget exactly the name of it. You could plant both of those, and they attract a lot of bees and for butterflies all well into the fall, including cuckoo bees. This Coleoxys cuckoo bee is a cuckoo bee on leafcutter bees. So they're it's kind of creepy when you see a cuckoo bee right next to another native bee that's, it's going to parasitize its nest. I'll do a little bit about how to use calscape.org. This is a mammoth, what I think is a mammoth sunflower. Calscape has a lot of information about native plants, including the varieties and the hybrids and cultivars, which is very handy. It has this new butterfly page, which is really great. I like that you can see how many Lepidoptera are likely to be hosted by this plant, and it gives ranges and how big they get. It's really handy. So I circled the butterflies button up here. If you go to calscape.org, and you can go by shrubs and trees and perennials. It's really kind of handy. And if you go to click on the butterfly link, there's lots of different butterflies. And say you wanted a Western tiger swallowtail, you might click on that one. And then it'll show you all the different host plants that you might put for that. And so there's like Western sycamore and white alder and hollyleaf cherry. Well, maybe these don't grow around here, but you could still keep going over and find that a royal willow grows here on the coast and plant one of those. Anyway, so it's really kind of handy that way. Check it out. Now, this is a Google map of the Jefferson Community Center where I used to hang out. So I put in a small garden near Grant and B Street, and then another one right next to it. But the folks at the Jefferson Community Center put in a whole native garden and through this section. These are all native plants through here. That lawn that I showed you with all that pollinator-friendly weeds, that's what's right out here. Anyway, so I could go around. I mean, there's already shrubs along the parking lots. That's wild or native plants anyway. So I think I have trouble scrolling through this one for some reason. So I'm going to have to get into another mode here for a second and then get back into presentation mode. So this is what I started with at Grant Street and B. There was about a 10-foot by 15-foot section that had been just left over after the construction was finished. And I thought 10 by 15, that sounds like the size of Thoreau's cabin in Walden. And it is exactly that size. And then one thing neat about Thoreau is that in the last 10 years of his life, he did a lot of great phenology work studying when wildflowers bloomed, when they leafed out, when spring migrant birds arrived from their wintering grounds. And that data has been looked at by Richard Premack, and you might want to read Walden Warming to see how early now plants are blooming, birds are arriving. It's a pretty neat study. I have a few little tips from planting a couple gardens, and one is to sketch out your spacing ahead of time so you don't get it overcrowded in one area. Try to select a variety of plants so there's something blooming every month of the year. I like alternating colors also. If you've got something blue and something yellow and something white, it looks better than having them all together. And you need to have a plan for weeding at least twice a month if you're not going to be there all the time. And a plan for watering too if you're also not going to be there all the time. I would keep some bare soil area open for bees. They like compacted bare soil for building their tunnels. And I would have a little water source for attracting wildlife, maybe a muddy area in the sun for butterflies. So this is a copy of my photograph of my sketch of that 10 by 15 garden. So I kind of figured out how big manzanita I could put in, how big a ceanothus I could put in. And, I actually used a ruler to try to guess how far apart to put stuff. And I would do it in pencil because I kept changing it and erasing and moving stuff around. And then it came time to build the garden, and a couple of volunteers came by the Jefferson Community Center, and they got put to work the next day. Renee Lopez and Lauren Sanchez were nice enough to help dig through some really hard soil there to get through. There's a gravel layer underneath the soil there to get started. And we planted our first shrubs that day in March 8th. And then by June, it's still poking along. The blue Gilia is still looking pretty good on the left here. The meadow foam is kind of petering out on the bottom, but it's still a work in progress in June. But by August, it's the sunflowers are up and looking really good. There's maybe 10 big sunflowers on each of the lemon queens. The gum plant is blooming. Lavender I put in. Oh, I put in another non-native Provence variety lavender anyway. And the Malva Sedalcia is getting pretty big here. The yarrow took off just from a couple 4-inch pots. And anyway, so you can do quite a change in a 10 by 15 area. Steve Collin was nice enough to build a trellis for 4 wild blackberries, the trailing blackberries, that I could cross back and forth across this trellis, so that they'll be available in the springtime for bees and butterflies. And then there was a spot right next door, and Steve was nice enough to rototill it up and got some plant and brought him some more topsoil, and I planted another 35 species in what I call the tank garden. So we put in a rain catchment tank there that catches rain all winter, and in the summer it actually pumps water from a cistern under the building that has to get rid of excess water, and it goes into the tank. And one other thing, when you get something from a nursery, make sure it's got no neonicotinoid pesticides in the seeds or in the plant itself anyway. So it's nice to have this label on it too. I would say that once you get the plants there, the other pollinators will appear. A lot of different kinds of flies. Some of them are like bee mimics, like some of the drone flies. Maybe longhorn beetles, they'll be out there pollinating too. And then if you do those, you'll get predators like this crossorb Orbweaver spider, European paper wasps, lady beetles, various species that are eating aphids. This potter wasp is looking for something to bring back to a nest. And this crab spider got itself a potter wasp, it looks like anyway. So you start building a web. Basically, you start with the plants, and primary munchers on plants will come in, and then the predators will set up shop, and they'll be, pretty soon you've got an ecosystem. So if you can restore ecosystem function because you're adding species diversity anyway, and with more variety of plants, more specialists in Lepidoptera will be able to flourish, and so will many more interrelated species. And like John Muir once wrote, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And you get to have this whole web of interrelated species going on. And that kind of goes along with what Robert McNamara theorized back in 1955, that as the number of species of an ecosystem increased, so did ecosystem stability and productivity. And I think that's what we're aiming to get back to by changing some of these areas like lawns into something productive. And again, instead of being biological wastelands. Because in the long run, I've been a bird watcher for a long time, and I want that flock of white-crowned sparrows to be able to raise kids and little baby chicks next spring. I love the sound of white-crowned sparrows in the spring, and all winter long they're able to get sunflower seeds from those lemon queen sunflowers. It may look a little shabby when you've got sunflowers that are leaning over and they got dead leaves and stuff like that, but they're still full of sunflowers that are picked off all winter long by sparrows and other birds too. So it's kind of a win-win, but it's messy compared to a lawn. Anyway, so you really have to look at being used to having things look a little bit raggedy if you want diversity. I have a bunch of lists here of like pollinator-supportive organizations, and I'm not really going to just go through each one. I think because this is going to get posted to YouTube here in a day or so, that you can go back at your leisure and just scroll to the end of the show and maybe start clicking on some of these different organizations. I joined Xerces Society. It's really a great organization for pollinator conservation. There's the North American Butterfly Association. I could go on. Then there's projects all around, like Bee City USA, where cities commit to not using nicotinoid pesticides and planting natives. And which is the first city in Humboldt County to be a Bee City USA? Is it going to be Arcata or Eureka or Trinidad? I'm just kind of curious. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of projects like this, and so you might check these out too. And there's lots of books on pollinators, like Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy, and Nature's Best Hope is his new book. Anyways, there's plenty. You can check them out on when you go to the website CNPS, North Coast CNPS. Anyway, some of my final thoughts are that if you plant native trees or shrubs, you'll have more Lepidoptera if you have the room. So try to do that if you can. And then make sure that there are native host plants so that butterflies and moths will have something to lay their eggs on. And then you need to plant a variety of nectar plants that bloom most of the year. And that's kind of tricky. So, you have to think about which ones will bloom when. And then we all need to lay off the pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, which apparently people use a lot of, even more than farms do. So it would be great to have less of those in the environment too. Try to put a water source in, just a little puddle. It could be just one of those little trays that goes under a big pot, and just fill it with a little muddy water and in a sunny spot, and it's be good for wildlife, not just butterflies. And I would start small and keep restoring more habitat. If you've got a lawn, maybe just do a strip that's maybe 6 feet wide down one side or something, and then after that gets established, you could do another part. you know, but at least half of your lawn, you should convert into something else if you can. And then birds feed their young a lot of high calorie caterpillars, and they're mostly moths. So because of that, we need to stop leaving our outdoor lights on at night and switch to motion sensor lights, because apparently it's really causing a big drop in moth species abundance because of there's so much more lights on all night than there used to be. And lastly, I'd say help kids like I was to experience and learn about nature directly. Thank you. That's about all I have to say. We'll go into questions after this. Andrea, I guess you're going to read some questions, if you have any. And neither of us are very experienced with Zoom, so I'm trying to find out.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. So Dan Seeley has a question. Any thoughts on planting milkweed?
Milkweed actually doesn't occur that much here on the coast, and monarch butterflies they do migrate through California, but it's mostly through the Central Valley area and down to the Southern California trees, and so it's good. Probably the best thing you could do for planting something for monarchs is to plant a lot of nectar plants that are going to be around in the spring and the fall when they're on migration, because they don't really here on the coast. There isn't a lot of milkweed. They're not laying eggs on milkweed here, and especially milkweed that is that tropical milkweed, Asclepias curvaceae, something or other. Anyway, and I wish I could give you Gary Phelps's talk on monarchs right now too. He has about and I talked about it back in January at the CNPS meeting, and so I think it's a little bit. It's not really recommended right now to plant. Well, you can plant milkweed because milkweed is a good nectar plant as well. But just don't be too disappointed if you don't get milkweed caterpillars here on the coast. That's about what I'd say about that. Okay.
And then William has a question about having too many little gray slugs in this garden. Is there any good predators or plants that you could plant to attract predators to control slugs?
Well, I think the more variety you plant and the more water sources you put in, and especially leaf litter, if you have plenty of debris on the ground, you're going to get more salamanders and other reptiles and amphibians that will actually eat the slugs. So I think in the long run, if you have a lot of leafy matter, that's one thing. Sometimes people plant. They'll have a tree over a lawn, but there's no place for the chrysalises really to get established, which usually they drop from the tree and they look for leafy debris under the tree. And so the more of a sort of composty layer for them to go in, that will help, I think. But that's the only natural one I can think of right now for slugs is something like salamanders to go after them.
Okay. Rebecca was curious about the lemon queen sunflower you mentioned. Is it a particular species favored by pollinators over other sunflowers or other Asteraceae?
Well, there's one reason for it, and I think it's because I want to go back to Pollinator Projects. There's a project called the Great Sunflower Project by Gretchen Laboon in the Bay Area of California, and you could check it out. And they want people there to plant lemon queens, and then do butter or bee watches, and have bees count bees on the lemon queen. So everybody's using the same variety of sunflower. And so that's why I planted that one. I never quite had the time to do any of the bee counts last summer, but I'm going to plant some more and see if I can do that this year. But other varieties are just fine, like the mammoth kind and stuff that you might find at by the CMPS plant sale at the North Coast Land Trust offices.
Okay. Another question is from Lorraine, saying she has a problem with a lot of spiders in her yard and wondering if those are a danger to the native bees.
They eat some native bees. I have a bunch of crab spiders on my plants here, and I've seen them get flies, like there's these syrphid flies or hover flies that I've seen them get those. I've seen them get at least one native bee, but they're part of the ecosystem, and I think most native bees are pretty good about not getting caught by one of those. But then there's also at that pollinator garden that I made at the Jefferson Community Center, there was cross orb spiders there, and tons of native bees. So they have a way of getting around them, even though there was, between all the big sunflowers, there was webs of cross orb weaver spiders. So I think they're just part of the ecosystem.
Okay, and Eileen says that she loves this presentation, but she has a very acidic soil type in her yard that she's trying to convert to her lawn to natives. Are there plants to avoid or that she can use to amend the soil?
Well, acidic is pretty good for most natives. I think, at least in a forest situation, most forest soils are pretty acidic. If you're planting a garden, for a vegetable garden, you would probably want to amend it with something that would raise the pH. But I don't think that that's a problem for a lot of natives. I could be wrong, but I've never heard of acidic soil being something that would affect them. And most of the time, it's not recommended to add any soil amendments to native plants. I must say I did put in some steer manure with some of the plants I put in at the Jefferson Community Center, because it was old recycled soil that had been under a sidewalk, and it was a gravel layer about 5 inches down. And but I probably fertilized some things, but the sunflowers loved it. And so I think you should just try making sure there's plenty of organic matter and there's good drainage. Those are probably more important than the acidity. Any other questions?
So there are a few more questions, but I think we're kind of running out of time. One of the last questions is, what are examples of local nectar plants? What resource did you recommend for that during your talk?
Well, I would go to the website, North Coast CNPS, and go click on the gardening pull-down menu. And there's a whole bunch of lists there of really good nectar plants. Anyway, there's one called Butterfly Favorites, which is good for nectar. If you went to YouTube and went through my talk here and just looked at some of the nectar ones there, a lot of the nectar ones are going to be trees and shrubs and perennials. They're not all annual wildflowers, but any combination of those is a good thing for nectar plants.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for the wonderful talk.
Well, it's been fun. And thanks everybody for showing up.
Good night.
Good night.